Good evening, people of the world. This is the fifth film for on the subject "Love and Hate," based and inspired by First John in the New Testament. Uh, I want to continue talking about how we need to be careful, how we treat people, and what we say. Jesus said in Matthew chapter 15, verse 10 and verse 18. Verse 10 says in Matthew chapter 15, Jesus called the crowd to him and said, "Listen and understand. What goes into a man's mouth does not make him unclean, but that what comes out of his mouth, that is what makes him unclean." And verse 18 says, "But the things that come out of the mouth come from the heart, and these make a man unclean." And it says in verse 10 at the beginning, Jesus called the crowd to him. So the sayings of Jesus is not just for the Christian, it's not just for the church, but it's for all people of the world. So what Jesus says here is applicable and relevant to everyone on earth, whether they're Christian or not. Jesus cares about what we say, and Jesus cares about what we think and feel. So it's very important that we be careful how we treat people. It's very important we be careful how we talk to others, and what we say when we're talking with people. And we need to be careful what we feel and think within ourselves. And it matters because what we think and feel inside ourselves is going to come out. That's what Jesus is saying here. It's it's going to come out. Your anger is going to come out. Your hate's going to come out. Your love's going to come out. Your joy and your enthusiasm is going to come out of you. And so people are going to be able to pick up on that, uh, and how we act and speak. And also, last week I was going to play this message, and the video was not having sound. My lips are moving and no sound's coming out. So I want to highlight some things I said last week. And this time I got headset with a working microphone. But last week I said the church has failed God and the church has failed the world, because there are people in churches who don't are not careful about what they say, and they're not careful how they treat others, and so they have acted out of a motivation of hate, whether they're aware of it or not, and people have been hurt, and that doesn't encourage people to come to the faith in Christ. It doesn't encourage them to come to church. It doesn't encourage them to become part of church, and it doesn't encourage them to become a Christian, because they have been let down because of how those who call themselves a Christian or a preacher act and behave. And even what even a whole church or ministry represents doesn't always necessarily represent love and encouragement and kindness. And some people even left the faith. They stopped going to church because they got hurt, because someone who called themselves a preacher or a Christian wounded them emotionally, psychologically, spiritually. And they left the faith, or they might not have left the faith, but they left church and won't go back because of it. And I too, I've experienced church hurt, but I've held on to Jesus, and that's why I encourage you, those of you listening, give Jesus Christ a chance. Jesus is everything. Jesus is worth it, regardless of what churches are doing, regardless of Christians and preachers and churches not acting in a loving way, not promoting love, instead of promoting and speaking hate. Jesus is love, and Jesus is nothing like them. Jesus has no part with a church or someone that calls himself a Christian or a preacher if they're not promoting love and they're not spreading love, they're not speaking love, they're not encouraging at all, and they're acting out of motives of hate. Jesus has no part with them. Give Jesus a chance, because I've followed Jesus Christ for 40 years. I've been walking with Jesus for 40 years. And I'm 49 now. Jesus is wonderful. And that's why I'm here uh, spreading this message of love on the street downtown, is because Jesus is wonderful. Jesus is worth it. It's worth it giving Jesus a chance, because I followed him 40 years. I've been hurt in the church. I've been hurt by people who call themselves a Christian. I've been wounded by them. But Jesus has never let me down. And finally, Jesus said to love one another. He told his disciples in John chapter 13, love one another. People would know you belong to me if you love one another, because a true preacher and a true Christian is full of love, and they're not going to go around spreading hate. They're not going to preach hate. They're not going to go around intentionally wounding and hurting people. They're not going to intentionally discourage you from the faith. Someone who is truly a follower of Christ is going to draw you into the faith and woo you into wanting to experience church with some real Christians. I hope this is a good explanation for you. And next time, we're going to talk about love for enemies. Thank you for letting me share.